This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. A new college class has graduated, and succeeding ones may have a different racial composition. Law professor Sheryll Cashin says if affirmative action is out, then use a college applicant's social status to determine admissions. If a conservative stopped listening to Fox News, would he or she change their views? No, says political scientist John Hibbing, who contends our politics are knitted into our DNA. And Bill Press talks with Congressman John Yarmuth of Kentucky. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Sheryll Cashin is an African-American law professor at Georgetown University. She makes the case in a new book that it is place, not race, that should be used in determining college admissions. And we say hello to Sheryll Cashin, former clerk to Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall, law professor at Georgetown University, and author in her new book, Place, Not Race, A New Vision of Opportunity in America, argues that affirmative action, as currently practiced, does little to help disadvantaged people and offers a new framework for true inclusion. Sheryll Cashin, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you for having me. Hello, Democrats.
Well, it's great to have you with us. Now, you argue for setting aside race itself as a factor in achieving diversity. What would you replace it with?
Well, I recommend a number of reforms, making the SAT and standardized tests optional, returning financial aid to being based on need, not merit, scrubbing the admissions process of all practices that are exclusionary. No legacy preferences, I also argue for using place as a consideration instead of race. I'm arguing that there should be a holistic admissions process where individual applicants are evaluated based on what resources they have available to them in a way that screens for the non-cognitive skills that predict success, resilience, grit, stick-to-itness, the kinds of things that are in Paul Tufts' book, How Children Succeed. But in terms of special considerations, I think special considerations should go to people, applicants who've had to overcome the serious structural disadvantage of having to grow up in a low-opportunity setting or attend a low-opportunity school. Only 42% of Americans today in this country live in a middle-class neighborhood. Now, that's down from 65% in 1970. Only 29% of Black and Latino children live in a middle-class neighborhood. And anybody who lives in America and just gets in the car and drives has a sense of this. We are increasingly a society where the affluent and the college-educated are segregated into their own neighborhoods of high opportunity. And if you grow up in that kind of setting, you have access to selective, high-quality K-12 education that sets you up well to enter selective higher education, and everybody outside of that milieu, is locked out of that situation. And so that's why I'm arguing that I believe universities have an ethical obligation to be realistic about the savage inequalities in K-12 education and give extra a bump up to people who are high achieving and have done the very best they can, even in a situation of serious disadvantage. And my reason why I support consideration of place instead of race is that we are at a place in American society where to be a certain race is not by definition an indicator of disadvantage, And I think it's time to begin to promote social cohesion and fairness. I want there to be more opportunity for everyone, and I want to build a saner, multiracial politics where people of all colors will coalesce and support public policies that improve public education, and we have less racial division and resentment in society.
And you also advocate getting rid of the phrase affirmative action. Why is that?
Right.
And is there then a better term for the idea of broadening access to education?
Yeah, I mean, affirmative action is a word that really comes from government. It's a word used in corporate America to connote compliance with federal anti-discrimination laws, and it's frankly a tainted word. A friend of mine who's a general counsel of a Fortune 500 company says to me, quite frankly, it's kind of a dirty negative word. It's we're not talking about affirmative action. It's viewed that way. It's laden with baggage, and I think a better word and a better practice, a better vision, I call it diversity practice. It acknowledged that diversity is not going away. We're becoming a more diverse country, and institutions of higher education. I think if they use that term, it acknowledges first that they value diversity. I mean, you can be transparent about that and say we value diversity. I think the better universities have diversity in their mission statement, but it also acknowledges that diversity is something that has to be nurtured and cultivated through daily practice and effort, not only in our admissions policies, but also in the culture we set at school. At all universities and all institutions, all workplaces, I believe should strive to be diverse and inclusive and set a culture where it's clear to all people of all colors that they are valued and their voices can be heard. So.
Well, and we're speaking with Sheryll Cashin, law professor at Georgetown University, author of several books, and the one we're talking about is Place Not Race, a new vision of opportunity in America. So then are there social and educational costs to affirmative action that outweigh the benefits? That's kind of what it sounds like you're saying.
Well, there's serious costs to racial preferences.
Right.
First, let me make it clear. I'm pro-diversity, right?
Sure.
So first of all, race is a very blunt instrument. It doesn't necessarily help those who are actually disadvantaged by the serious structural obstacles that exist in our society. It fuels resentment. It contributes to a perception that racial minorities, are somehow undeserving. And it, frankly, I believe, buys diversity on the cheap. I mean, a university using race in affirmative action can achieve what I call optical diversity in a way that inhibits both institutions from seeing and attacking the larger systems of exclusion and unfairness, not only in admissions in higher education, but in American society. And so I think we would be fairer, and it would be would promote more social cohesion to look at other ways of creating diversity while helping people who are actually disadvantaged.
Well, since the courts have recently been ruling against the use of race in determining college admissions, and with public opinion somewhat wary of affirmative action, what factors could be used to make sure that colleges are racially diverse?
Right. Well, in my book, I feature Amherst University, which nearly 1/4 of the student body at Amherst, one of the top-ranked liberal arts colleges in the country, is low income. And they are very, very diverse racially. I don't have that number in front of me, but they set out about 10, 15 years ago to dramatically increase their diversity, and they focused heavily on socioeconomics, and they found that when they recruited, and by the way, every year there are 25 to 35,000 low-income, high-achieving kids, often that are living in overlooked, lower opportunity places that a lot of elite institutions just miss, you know. So I want to be clear, I'm not talking about watering down standards or merit, but a number of factors could help increase racial diversity without using race. One, giving, you might call it zip code preferences, but kids who come from a neighborhood where, let's say, 20% or more of the people in that census tract in that neighborhood are poor. There's all kinds of research that underscores the serious disadvantage which comes with exposure to poverty. But if you've managed to be the valedictorian of your high school despite those disadvantages, you know, you're a very deserving person, and you probably have an extreme amount of fortitude and stick-to-itiveness resilience in order to, you know, rise and be very, very high achieving despite those disadvantages. So consideration of the places that kids come from, consideration of low family wealth, you know, single parenthood. I'm arguing that the admissions process should give special consideration to these kinds of factors. And the Amherst example shows that, and other research I cite shows that there are race-neutral ways to create just as much, if not more, diversity than by using race. And by the way, I want to be clear about this. For me, place is not a proxy for race. I'm not trying to create racial or encourage universities to create racial diversity by stealth, right?
Right.
My agenda is much more radical than that. I'm trying to encourage universities to counter profound structural disadvantages in American society that harm people of all colors. And if we Democrats, we're, you know, your audience is Democrats, right? We don't begin to focus on the mutuality of harms that are out there and to try to create a functional racial, multiracial politics, i.e. where people of color and white people who are struggling coalesce around policies, fair policies that bring all people along, I think we're doomed in this country.
Mm-hmm. Now, your book cites studies showing that kids who have high-achieving and prosperous parents have an advantage in school. If that's the case, is there anything really wrong with colleges using the now discredited legacy admission if the student is otherwise on the margin?
Well, in the book, I cite a number of institutions that have scrapped racial preferences, either because they've been forced to by law or because they've decided they're not going to use them anymore. And to their credit, I'm thinking that the University of California system, the University of Georgia, some other examples I cite in the book. To their credit, they also said, well, we're also going to drop legacy preferences, right?
Yeah.
It seems to me.
Is that kind of a tit for tat sort of thing? I mean.
Well, no, my feeling. Okay, so first of all, I want to be clear. I am very clear. I wrote an epilogue in the book to my sons about this. I'm very clear that my position is going against my own family's self-interest, right?
Yeah.
You know, I'm an upper middle class family that has kids that probably would benefit from racial preferences. But what is fair about my kids who've had, frankly, you know, every cognitive developmental need in their life has been met? Right? Mm-hmm. They've got tutors. They have two different tutors, a Mandarin tutor and a regular tutor. You know, I mean, I'm doing what most high-income parents do. There's an arms race going on in this country, and you know, there are 6 degrees. Their parents have 6 degrees between the two of us, right? What is fair about my kids with every possible advantage getting a leg up in admissions or a leg up in my alma mater, Vanderbilt, or their father's alma mater, Harvard, just because their parents went there, but as opposed to some other kid who's going to college for the first time. My kids are going to be fine, right?
Yeah.
The kids, I send a message. I send a message to my sons every day, like, welcome to the world. We're in a bewilderingly diverse country. It's going to get more diverse, and nobody is entitled to a certain spot at a university. Everybody has to work hard. And I say this to my kids. I say this to other black kids, for example. Not that they're the only people who benefit from racial preferences, but if you don't want hard and take the most challenging classes available to you, don't complain when that Ghanaian immigrant takes your spot. American kids are competing in a global setting now, and so I just don't think it's fair, and I also, frankly, was raised in a home where I was taught to care about other people's kids who have a lot less than I do, right? I think we need to be a little bit more other regarding, and the children of parents who went to elite schools, they'll get in somewhere. They'll be fine. And if they work hard, there's a decent chance they'll get in somebody's selective school.
Okay.
But that is not true of kids who are working hard, but who may not have the wealth to rely on to pay for school, may not get, have the what's called college knowledge. They just may not even know how to negotiate the entire application system.
Right. Well, and that's a problem for a lot of people.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But right. So universities should not be in the business of reifying and reinforcing existing advantages in society.
Okay. Sheryll Cashin, a law professor at Georgetown University, an author, and her new book, Place Not Race, A New Vision of Opportunity in America. Sheryll, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to having you back again soon.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're quite welcome. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. Political scientist John Hibbing explains how our political beliefs are intertwined with who we are as people, and we'll talk to him about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Whoa, that was close. The National Rifle Association came dangerously close to shooting itself in the foot recently with a common sense editorial it posted online. The group of rootin'-tootin', bullet-spittin', doctrinaire, guns-everywhere extremists finally saw something that even it considered too extreme. In Texas, naturally, worshippers of the glorious gun god have taken to shouting out their ideological absolutism in coffee shops, museums, chain restaurants, and other public places by having a dozen or more of their congregation walk in together with shotguns, assault rifles, and other weaponry strapped onto them. Any gun, anywhere is their message, expressed in an unsubtle, don't mess with us swagger. Scary, exclaimed the NRA editorial, calling the macho show counterproductive to the cause of gun rights, and adding that such peacocking is downright weird. That is, of course, a sane response. But sanity is not comfortable turf for gun dogmatists, and the NRA was quickly hit with a barrage of fire from its own ranks, plus an explosion of rage from gun groups that are, believe it or not, even gunnier than the NRA. So the big bad never-surrender rifle organization quickly threw in the towel, recanting its momentary lapse into sanity and cravenly blaming some unnamed lowly staffer for the incident of ideological impurity. So, apparently, you can expect to see newly sanctioned NRA gun strutters parading into cafes near you. But let me ask this. How would these strutters react if a band of African Americans or Latinos strided into one of their cafes armed to the teeth? This is Jim Hightower saying, I'm with the president on this one. There's no reason, he said, why on the street today a citizen should be carrying loaded weapons. Oh, by the way, that was not President Obama, it was Ronald Reagan.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Professor John Hibbing has studied politics and people's brains. He says people can sometimes change their views based on evidence, but mostly we voters are responding in part to genetics, how we are programmed to see the world. And we say hello to John R. Hibbing, political science and psychology professor at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. He is co-author of a new book, Predisposed, Liberals, Conservatives, and the Biology of Political Differences. John Hibbing, thanks so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
It is a pleasure, Jim.
I should mention your co-authors, too, Kevin Smith and John Alford. You know, your book is very interesting and quite funny as well, but the serious point is that what we think are rational differences of political opinion may really be part of our DNA. Are we that controlled by our genes?
No, I certainly wouldn't say that we are controlled by our genes. In fact, you know, words like control and predetermined really don't show up in our book. It doesn't work that way. But there are these, what we call predispositions, these tendencies. And genetics is a part of that. Some people like to deny that, but it's part of what we are. It's certainly not everything biologically. A couple of quick examples. There's an interesting study that shows London taxi drivers actually have changes in a part of their brain, the hippocampus, which is involved with directionality and memory, the longer they drive a taxi. So I mention that because that's something that's very biological, but it's not genetic. It changed throughout the course of their lifetime. So much of what we do in the book is not just genetics. In fact, there's only one chapter in the book on genetics, but we do see this as part of a whole biological package which can be influenced by the environment as well as genetics.
Perhaps explaining why one cab driver may be better than another?
Well, yeah, you don't know. And, of course, it raises interesting questions about whether they became cab drivers in the first place because they had, you know, an affinity for that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Now, you and your co-authors say that the political predispositions we are born with are measurable. But how do you measure them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, you know, usually what political scientists and psychologists do would be to ask people to conduct surveys, and then the respondent would self-report these things. But, you know, our notion is that people really aren't aware of a lot of the forces acting on them. So, as your question kind of suggests, we need to go deeper and use some alternative techniques. So we use things like physiological measures where you can find out whether their sympathetic nervous system has responded or not, even something as simple as skin conductance measures. We use an eye tracker, which allows us to know what people are looking at and what they're paying attention to. We use some neuroimaging studies, so we know what the brain is doing. You know, the common link here is that all these things do not require the participant to tell you consciously what they're doing or what they're paying attention to. Even endocrine levels, whether people have high or low cortisols in response to a stressful situation, we think is a trait that has clear political ramifications.
We're speaking with John Hibbing, political science and psychology professor at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and co-author of the book Predisposed, Liberals, Conservatives, and the Biology of Political Differences. So I guess then what you're saying is that it's patterns, not specific poll questions or specific votes that are predetermined or predisposed?
Yes, yeah, that's. I'm glad you brought that up because people get confused about that. It seems like politics is so idiosyncratic and culturally specific. You know, how could anything like biology or genetics pertain to federal housing or something? But there's a quote by Emerson, who oftentimes doesn't get much attention as a political thinker, but I really like it, and in fact I've memorized it. He said, "The two parties which divide the state, the party of conservatism and that of innovation, are very old and have disputed the possession of the world ever since it was made." So I like that because it kind of takes it down to the level that we think about politics at, which is, not the issues of the day so much. It's just this general orientation to new ideas and innovation as opposed to traditional ways of doing things. And I think at that level, you start to see that there might be differences. In fact, one that we find is that conservatives tend to be much more responsive to negative kinds of images that we might present or scary sounds. So it doesn't mean they're afraid necessarily, but they are paying attention and they are more physiologically responsive than people who have these kind of predispositions toward innovation, to use Emerson's phrase.
Just what is a predisposition, scientifically speaking, anyway?
Well, we think of them as inertial characteristics. So, and by that, the implication is that they can change. I think that's important to get on the table. But they do take on a kind of life of their own. They do have some inertial forces, and it's difficult to change them. They're kind of like super tankers is the way I like to think of them, that you might be able to change your politics, but especially as you go through life, it becomes more and more difficult to really uproot your kind of standing beliefs and adopt something different. So these inertial characteristics do have kind of biological instantiation. We've built them into our I shouldn't say we have done that they have been built into who we are physically and emotionally and psychologically.
You cite one social scientist as saying that our brains have a baloney generator that overrides objective reality. I think I can think of a couple of examples, but if you wouldn't mind, can you give us an example or two of that kind of baloney?
Sure. I think our brains are built to kind of make sense of the world. This is a very useful thing from an evolutionary point of view. So we don't like it when there aren't reasons for things. So one of the examples I like is there's a study where they put a square and a circle and a triangle on a computer screen, and then they've just programmed those geometric shapes to move about randomly. They'll have subjects watch this, and then they'll ask them later to describe what they saw. And the common pattern is for people to say, well, the square was chasing the circle, and then the triangle went into the corner and hid, or something like that. They anthropomorphize, when in fact these shapes were just moving randomly. Interestingly, autistic individuals are the only ones who get this right. They just say, these things moved. So, that's the kind of baloney we're talking about, where people try to come up with reasons and explanations for actions, even their own actions. There's a famous study where you can take something called a transcranial magnetic stimulator, and you stimulate a certain part of the brain, the motor cortex, and that can cause stand up involuntarily. Well, when you do this and then ask people why they stood up, they'll usually come up with a reason. They'll say, I needed to stretch, or I was going to go open a window, or I needed to move. And, that's pure baloney. They did it because they were given some stimulation that involuntarily made them do that. So, but we don't like that, and that's what we mean by a baloney generator. We come up with these reasons that frequently are not accurate.
I was going more along the lines of Fox News, but that's perhaps another story
well,
for another.
There's all kinds of baloney in the world.
Yes, but I guess but that would work both ways, correct? I mean, if we took something like a Fox News or MSNBC, depending upon which your choice is that the same sort of thing then?
Well, I think what you see there is that, once people have these predispositions, and, you could call them biases as well, these are, our interpretation of the world, the way we experience it, then we seek confirmation or affirmation for these views. And, a lot of people have the idea that if we could just get conservatives to stop watching Fox News, that things would change. And, I'm afraid that's not true. They're watching Fox News for a reason. That does something for them. And yeah, the same could be true on the liberal side as well. We seek some of these affirmations. So, and that has a self-perpetuating kind of feature, which of course is not always good.
And so they're seeking out what's already supported in their own brains.
Exactly. Yeah. It adds to it to some extent, but that initial desire to have that kind of message in the first place, I think, is something that we need to take more seriously.
Yeah. Again, we're speaking with John Hibbing, political science and psychology professor at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and co-author of the book Predisposed: Liberals, Conservatives, and the Biology of Political Differences. He co-authored this with Kevin Smith and John Alford. John, I suppose there are always exceptions to every rule, and is that how you would explain perhaps the views of commentator Ron Reagan?
Sure. In fact, I wouldn't even call it exceptions to the rule, because our notion here is that these things are just patterns there are always going to be exceptions. One of the running themes of our book is to think probabilistically. So when we throw out these things that, conservatives tend to respond more and to be more attentive to negative features of the environment, that doesn't mean that every single conservative is like that, or it doesn't mean that no liberal is just not paying attention to the environment. Obviously, that's the case. So these are relationships. The relationship certainly is at 1.0. We never, science doesn't work that way, and there are lots of exceptions. Although Ronald Reagan Sr. was a liberal at some point in his life, and so it's hard to know exactly what the reality was there. We try not to study politicians themselves, which sounds a little odd. We're more focused on ordinary individuals because politicians, I think, can sometimes give off indicators that aren't truly indicative of who they are politically. I had a student. I live in a conservative state. The student was liberal at the time. He became a politician and became very conservative. Well, I don't really know if he honestly is conservative or if he understood that he wanted to be a successful politician, and that's what you needed to do. So we'd like to strip that away and get down to ordinary people and just see what these predispositions do for their politics.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think there are a lot of other factors when it comes to somebody who's running for a particular office and needing to keep that office, perhaps.
Thank you. You said that better than I did.
Now, there's an old joke about Republican couples sleeping in twin beds and Democrats sleeping in double beds, which is why there are more Democrats. If any of that is true, that would be good for progressive movement, right?
Well, unfortunately, the birth rate for conservatives around the world turns out to be higher than it is for liberals. So I don't know how that factors into their kind of sleeping arrangements. But, I think the larger point here is that there are a lot of patterns and tastes and tendencies that are different for liberals and conservatives. And, and a lot of these we document in our book. They're just things about what kinds of foods we eat and what kind of art we like and what kind of literature we prefer. And these are real. Our political beliefs they're really fundamentally intertwined with who we are as people. And I think that's one of the messages we're trying to send in the book, because a lot of people have this idea that they're just kind of idiosyncratic and they're tapped on to who we are. But we see politics as really oozing up from our very souls. And if that's the case, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to change. And if that's the case, it also would appear in these other things like the kinds of neighborhoods we live in and the kinds of foods that we eat.
Wow, fascinating stuff. John Hibbing, political science and psychology professor at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. The book, Predisposed, Liberals, Conservatives, and the Biology of Political Differences. John, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to having you back again soon.
I'd like that, Jim.
Great, thank you very much. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press and his guest, Kentucky Congressman John Yarmuth.
We love being on Capitol Hill because it's a good way to lure senators and members of Congress who are on their way to their office to stop by and say hello on the way to work in the morning. Congressman John Yarmuth from Kentucky, good friend of the program, does that again this morning. Welcome back, Congressman.
Thanks, Bill.
It's nice to see you. Lots to talk about in these very busy days. Before we get to that, we have a little bit of breaking news this morning.
At the top of this hour, I mentioned that today is George H.W. Bush's 90th birthday.
Happy birthday, Mr. President.
He is celebrating. He asked all of us to celebrate by wearing kooky, zany socks, right? That's his thing. But we just got word. He tweeted, quote, "It's a wonderful day in Maine. In fact, nice enough for a parachute jump." And his team has confirmed he is making a parachute jump today for his 90th birthday. He says, "I have one more left in me." He is parachuting with the Golden Knights, the Army's parachute team, near his summer home on the Maine coast later today.
Yeah, I know he did that on his 85th birthday.
And he said no, he didn't. He hasn't done it. He said on his 85th birthday, he says, I want to do it one more time on my 90th birthday. And so he's going. They kept it quiet because they were really waiting it out to see if he thought he had it in him. And he made the call today. He's got it in him. So he's jumping.
That's wonderful.
Isn't that cool?
It really is, yeah. More power to him.
Right on, man. Yeah.
Absolutely. Wonder what Barbara thinks about that. She probably says, you crazy loon.
No, my wife would say that now. But at 90, oof.
Yeah. Well, more power to him. Just don't expect me to follow his example.
Nor I.
Well, Congressman, so Eric Cantor, what was it like around there when you heard the news and with your colleagues heard the news that nobody expected, right?
Yeah, I don't think there was anybody anywhere on the Hill that saw this coming. And from our side, there's, of course, I guess, a natural inclination to kind of gloat. But on the other hand, we see the implications for possibly the agenda that we would like to pursue, and maybe this is not so good. But I think the Republicans were all kind of saying, what do we do now? It's like, what happens now? They're in kind of a not really panicky situation, but it's turmoil on the other side. And of course, now the immediate campaign starts for his successor. Apparently, they're going to have a vote a week from today, which is amazing. And so I guess confusion reigns on the Hill right now.
Now, when Cantor decided to step down as majority leader, I mean, as you pointed out, the agenda, it was tough anyway, right? It was going to be tough anyway to get anything done.
That's right.
Now it's even more difficult.
Probably so. I mean, there is a school of thought, for instance, on immigration that this might make it easier for Speaker Boehner to bring immigration to the floor because some of the people who are in tough districts may say it'd be good for me to cast a vote against it. On the other hand, it will pass. So I'm not sure about that school of thought. But, clearly this, among all things, this means the Republican Party in the House is moving to the right, has moved to the right, will continue to move to the right, marginalizing itself from the American people. And so I think all of us look at it and say we might not be able to take back the House in 2014, but I think this sets us up really well for 2016, and we just have to keep pounding home the idea that this is a Congress that is led by a very extreme element of the society that doesn't represent mainstream thinking.
Now, you were part of the Gang of Eight that was looking at immigration reform in the House. And there were so many stories yesterday saying, Cantor got knocked out because he was such a moderate on immigration reform. Did you ever see Cantor as one of your allies, a moderate on immigration reform?
Quite to the contrary. He did concede that there was a merit in passing the DREAM Act or something like it. He talked about that. But in terms of the fundamental reform issues related to some kind of path to citizenship or any of those other issues, H-1B visas, I never heard him talk about that. And that's something that virtually everybody agrees on. That's the highly skilled visas.
Yes.
And the temporary worker reform. So I don't know how in the world you characterize him as a moderate on this. And, in terms of just in general House agenda, he's the one who stood up in January in front of the Republican conference with a blank sheet of paper and said, this is our agenda for 2014. So, I don't think he wanted to do much of anything.
No, and I know it was either Monday or late last week, because we had a guest in who was talking about it. He put out the list of here, we don't have a lot of time left in this session, but here are the things that we're going to work on in this session. Immigration reform was not on the list.
No, that's right. And speaking of that, it bears calling to attention that we now, after this week, have 36 days of the House being in session between now and the 4th. The next 5.5 months, we have 36 days. And of those days, 10 of them are the days we come back, either the Monday or Tuesday, when we don't go into session until 6:30. So we essentially have 26 business days between now and the election.
Wow.
So not much is going to get done.
Now, I just thought of this, and I should have started right here because it is the most important issue we have to talk to you about. So you're from Kentucky, all right? It starts with the Kentucky Derby, and then it goes to the Preakness. Now, do you think...
Careful, this is controversial territory here.
I know. But do you think that a horse should be able to skip the first two races and come in to the Belmont and then, and race and prevent somebody else from getting the Triple Crown?
Well, yeah, I do, and
I
think there is merit in
so California Crown, the owner, when he
the
said,
owner's complaint. I think there's merit, but that's only true if you think of the Triple Crown as something like a playoff series. If you think of it as three classic races, and you actually run through the possible ramifications of his theory, then you would end up with the Belmonts with 3 horses in them, or 2 horses in them. And so
because the others would drop out.
Exactly. You'd be degrading those races. I mean, even when in Secretariat's year, I was fortunate enough to be at all 3 legs of Secretariat's Triple Crown.
Whoa.
In person. Great. I didn't cash a ticket on any of them, which is another story. But no, that's another story. But you had 5 horses in that race, and you had a Derby field that year that had phenomenal horses in it. As a matter of fact, a horse, this is ancient history to some people, a horse named Forgo, who ended up being one of the great horses of all time, raced till he was 7 or 8 years old. And he ran 4th in Secretariat's Derby. It was a great field. The Florida Derby winner ran 9th in that race, was a great horse. I can't remember the name. So those horses all back, they after the Preakness, Sham ran 2nd in the Preakness as he had in the Derby, and he came back, but nobody else did. So you'd end up with terribly short fields, and so I think you would actually do a disservice to the Preakness and the Belmont.
Okay, well, we'll send that out to the owner of the California Crown. I forget the man's name already, but in Kentucky, we have talked several times. Kentucky was out in front on Obamacare with the state, your state plan, K-Care or
Connect, K-Y-N-E-C-T, Connect.
And still a success story, still working, still.
Absolutely, it's phenomenal. We enrolled 413,000 people in the 6 months, which was essentially half of our previously uninsured population. The average age was 50% were under 35, 52% were under 35.
Whoa,
so it was a very good population mix age-wise.
That's huge.
Yeah, phenomenal. And the only problem we're having now, and this has recurred in some other places, is a lot of the people who signed up for expanded Medicaid still are using emergency rooms, basically because they really haven't figured out that they need to get a primary care physician or go to an immediate care center or a community health center as opposed to the emergency room. So the hospitals are trying to do a better job of triaging those people and diverting them. But the hospitals are now being paid for the care they provide, which they weren't before for these people. So that's just an education process, and that'll solve itself. But otherwise, people are, the stories are rampant of people whose lives have been saved just in that period because they went in, they got a checkup for the first time in 5 years, and they found a problem. They had heart blockage, arterial blockage, or whatever, and got saved. And so it's been an incredible success story.
And isn't it interesting? You don't hear Republicans talking much about repeal anymore, do you?
No. Mitch McConnell is, pull it out root and branch, which was his catchphrase. He's not saying that much anymore. And in fact, when confronted by a reporter about, do you still want to repeal that, he said, well, I think people can still have Connect without the Affordable Care Act, which, of course, is nonsense. And he was
caught on that.
So he's trying to have it both ways, too. He knows Connect is popular, and now he's trying to deceive people once again that's not the same thing as the Affordable Care Act.
Yeah. Eric Cantor and Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, Connect, and the big Mitch McConnell, Allison Lunderson Grimes race, too, all to talk about here. Congressman John Yarmuth from Kentucky, Kentucky's 3rd District. Congressman John Yarmuth from Kentucky's 3rd District here in studio with us. So, Congressman, you got a Senate race down there in Kentucky, which is the #1 most watched Senate race in the nation. Allison Lunderson Grimes versus Mitch McConnell. How's it look?
I think Mitch is going to lose. I think Allison's going to win. I think she's
a good candidate, isn't she?
Very, very good campaign, and people I think are just tired of Mitch. And plus, kind of connecting it to the Eric Cantor race, people see Mitch McConnell as somebody who's worried more about his party nationally and his leadership role than he is about Kentucky. And I think that's one of the factors, if not the primary factor, that doomed Eric Cantor. So he's facing that same thing. He's been around a long time. He's never been someone that people personally liked. And and once he was not able to bring money back to the state anymore through earmarks, he lost basically what was the foundation of his strength. So now people are saying, why are you here? You've been there 30 years. What are you doing now? All you're doing is blocking anything from happening. So he's in serious trouble. His disapproval rating is like 56%. It's hard to win when you have a job disapproval rating that high. And in something like 17 straight polls, he's never gotten past 45%. And, if you're there 30 years and you can't get past 45% in 17 polls, I think you're pretty well capped there.
Maybe time to hang it up.
It seems to me he has the problem that Eric Cantor had of he's not a politician from Kentucky. He is a national politician.
Exactly.
He has sort of been a celebrity politician on the national stage for so long that Kentuckians might not recognize him anymore.
Well, when you have a job approval or of Congress of 10 or 12% or whatever it is, and you're the face of that
Congress,
then you've got a problem.
Right. The EPA came out with its new rules last week on existing coal-powered plants. Kentucky is one of those states which has a large presence of coal-powered plants. Do you see this as bad news for Kentucky?
Well, actually, I think it's probably good news for Kentucky. I think certainly there are going to be some people who are adversely affected. There are going to be some coal miners who are going to lose their jobs. There's no question about that. And we need to figure out as a state, and Governor Beshear and Hal Rogers, the Republican congressman from the coal country, have actually created a program to try and transition the coal economy to something else. So we need to focus on that, and we need to invest some money in that. But by and large, we're going to have much cleaner environment. We're going to have energy, a more diverse energy portfolio. And, we know there are going to be thousands of jobs created in Kentucky and across the country in alternative energy, whether it's solar, biomass, wind, whatever it may be, even hydroelectric power. We have a huge river system through Kentucky. So we've got lots of opportunities, and right now, both McConnell and Grimes are kind of climbing over each other to defend coal and attack the EPA. But the EPA did what we asked them to do in Kentucky, which was give us the opportunity to create a plan that is uniquely suited to our situation. And our governor actually submitted a proposal that said we can meet this goal in 6 years, not by 2030, but by 2020, if you just give us the flexibility to do it, which they did. So I think it's going to be something that it's not going to adversely impact Kentuckians in an economic sense. Again, there's some coal mining families that will be adversely affected, but it's something we've got to do. Everybody who looks at this industry knows that coal is on its way out, that is not sustainable as an energy source.
And final question, Congressman, another tragic school shooting this week, and yet probably nothing's going to happen in the Congress because so many are afraid of the NRA. You have proven in your career you can stand up to the NRA and still get elected.
Yeah, I've got an F rating from the NRA, proud of that, and I'm not sure I could get away with that in the rest of Kentucky, but in my district, I think we have very sensible citizens who understand that things like background checks and limits on magazine size and assault weapons bans are reasonable steps to protect ourselves. And when you live in an urban area, you have a different perspective on gun violence than you do maybe out in rural areas. So I understand that, but what we just got so frustrated the other day, several of us, it's another moment of silence. It seems like every week we have one or two moments of silence because there's another shooting. And I got up on the floor and said, let's not have another moment of silence. Let's have a moment of action. Let's do something about this. We can act. And background checks, which 92% of the American people support, is a reasonable, logical first step.
So, well, you keep up the fight. I think the American people, I know the American people are with you.
Well, that's right. And one of the things that's sad, I don't know if you saw this, but there have been so many school shootings. There have been like 74 since Sandy Hook. And there's a company now out of Oklahoma, I think, that is marketing bulletproof blankets.
Yeah. We talked about that.
To school children. I mean, is that the saddest commentary on this country that you could possibly have?
That's not the answer.
No.
The answer is get rid of the guns. Congressman John Yarmuth, great to see you. Thanks for your leadership on so many good fronts.
Appreciate it.
And we'll get you back here again soon.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Sheryll Cashin, John Hibbing, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate.